Good morning, honorable members. Welcome to the month of March, a month I prophetically declare by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit as the month of miracles. For our Moments of Impact devotional segment during the entire month of March, I'll be sharing on how to position yourself to experience the miraculous. Today, I want to speak from the topic perseverance. I think all of us would agree that life is not a bed of roses. Life has its fair shares of ups and downs. None of us, no matter our social, economic, political, or religious status, is exempt from the challenges of life. Over the years, I've learned one of the invaluable lessons of life is that what happens to us is not half as important as how we respond to what happens. To overcome life's challenges and to experience any level of success, you must possess an indomitable spirit of perseverance. You must persevere beyond the crowd or the proverbial noise in the marketplace. I recall a story in the book of Mark, chapter 10, verses 46 through 52, that epitomizes, in my estimation, the spirit of perseverance through the eyes of a blind man. And it reads, "Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed him. A blind man named Bartimaeus was sitting beside the road. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was passing by, he began to shout, 'Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me.' 'Be quiet,' many of the people yelled at him, but he only shouted louder, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' When Jesus heard him, he stopped and said, 'Tell him, come here.' So they called to him and said, 'Cheer up, come, he is calling you.' Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. 'What do you want me to do for you?' Jesus said. 'My Rabbi,' the blind man said, 'I want to see.' And Jesus said to him, 'Go, for your faith has healed you.' Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus on the road." The moral of this story is that our victory is in our perseverance. Despite the crowd trying to prevent Bartimaeus from experiencing a breakthrough, by telling him, "Be quiet," Bartimaeus shouted even the more. It was his perseverance that got the attention of Jesus and ultimately his healing. In conclusion, I want to leave you with this thought. Whatever you are faced with today, no matter the size, no matter the difficulty, be encouraged and persevere. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 says, "Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." Selah. Think and act on these things. Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we praise and we exalt you for who you are. We reverence and we adore your holy and precious name. You are the God of heaven and the God of earth, and we bless your name this day. We pray, Almighty God, that you would grant us the spirit of perseverance as we seek to navigate through the vicissitudes of life. Help us, Almighty God, not to get weary in well-doing. Help us to never give up. I ask you today, Almighty God, to grant us fresh strength and grace to deal with every difficulty that may come our way. Lord, I ask you to move upon this honorable house today and let your peace and your presence dwell in our midst. Let there be no confusion, no anarchy, and no discord in this house today. Grant these honorable members wisdom and knowledge from on high as they seek to conduct the affairs of our nation. Continue to bless the Bahamas and make your face to shine upon us and be gracious unto us, even now and forevermore. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Let us repeat the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Cooper, Fred Mitchell, Glennis Hannah Martin, Obadiah Wilchcomb, Alfred Sayers, Dr. Michael Darble, Clay Sweeting, Keith Bell, Wayne Monroe, Vaughn Miller, JoBeth Colby Davis, Ginger Moxie, Mario Boleg, Jomo Campbell, Basil McIntosh, Miles LaRoda, Pia Glover Roll, Lisa Rami, Zane Lightborn, Dr. Hubert Minnis, Jamal Strawn, John Pinder, Marcus Roll, Leon Lundy, Kirk Cornish, Wade Watson, Leonardo Lightborn, Leslie Miller Bryce, Leroy Major, Sylvanus Petty, Mikhail Bonnerby, Michael Pintard, James Quasey Thompson, Aram Lewis, Shannon Don Cartwright, Adrian Gibson, Adrian White.
Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, honorable members.
Good morning, Speaker.
Now, Speaker isn't feeling the best today. So that letting you know I already have a headache. I don't want no shouting over my head, right, Sanans? I don't want no shouting over my head today, right? Okay, thank you very much. Now, let me do 1 minute of house cleaning before we get into the agenda, and we are debating the midterm debate, budget debate today, and I think tomorrow, right, honorable member? And so I want us to stay on script. I would like for us to stay on script, please. Next thing. Now, you all sent me on lots of training, and I normally speak to people privately, but let me say this publicly. All of these coffee cups that you all just leave, there are 5 members bought coffee cups in last week, and 4 left it right there on the table. That ought not to happen. Nowhere I traveled under any parliament do I see that. So I would like today to be the last day we see this happen in the People's House. We leave all the bottles and all the coffee cups all over the place, and that ought not to happen. I've been to London, I've been around the world, and I see in their parliaments, and I don't see these things happening, so I don't think we should have that in our house. Now, if you want coffee, tea, water, we have a smokers room, and all those things are readily available to you. If you would like to have a special bottle of water, ask one of the clerks to get that bottle of water, pour it into one of the glass here, and enjoy that bottle of water. But today is the last day for that. Right, honorable members?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, honorable members. Let us go now and do the people's business. Introduction and swearing in of new writs, of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Madam Speaker, beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Public Debt Management Bahamas Registered Stock, number 2, 2025, 2027, 2029, 2032, 2042, and 2052, directions 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up.
You have the document?
The folder.
Madam Speaker? It's not, yeah.
Order the document to lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers.
Madam Speaker, beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Bank and Trust Companies Eligible Financial Contracts Regulations 2023.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the document be brought up. Thank you. Order the document to lie on the table. Further laying of documents. The chair recognizes the honourable member for English.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute 2021-2022 Annual Report.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the document be brought up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Order that the document lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fort Charlotte.
Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Good morning,
I
honourable
beg
member.
leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. A, the Bahamas Electricity Corporation Power and Light Annual Report 2016 to 2018, and the Bahamas Electricity Corporation Bahamas Power and Light Annual Report for 2019 to 2020.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the document be brought up. Thank you. Order that the documents lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Okay. Thank you, honourable member. Statement and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Centerville.
Madam Speaker, I rise in this honorable House to Madam Speaker, I rise in this honorable House to deliver a communication on road safety. Globally, over 3,500 people die every day on roads, which amounts to nearly 1.3 million preventable deaths and an estimated 50 million injuries each year, making it the leading killer of children and young people worldwide. As things stand, road traffic accidents are predicted to cause a further 13 million deaths and approximately 500 million injuries during the next decade without urgent action. According to the Royal Bahamas Police Force, over 6,000 traffic accidents were reported in 2022. Approximately 59 traffic fatalities were recorded last year. Most of the victims, Madam Speaker, were young Bahamian males. Many of the traffic fatalities were recorded on the islands of New Providence, Eleuthera, Grand Bahama, and Abaco. Madam Speaker, our country cannot afford to continue to record the number of road traffic fatalities we are experiencing today. We are losing far too many of our young people. To address the number of traffic fatalities in our nation and to promote road safety, the Ministry of Transport and Housing is relaunching a comprehensive national road safety program under the theme, Slow Down, Stay Alive. The National Road Safety Program will be led by a National Road Safety Council comprised of professionals from the Ministry of Transport and Housing, the Ministry of Tourism, Investments and Aviation, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Ministry of Education and Vocational and Technical Training, the Ministry of Public Works and Utilities, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Road Traffic Department, and the Department of Local Government. The Council will work in conjunction with the Road Traffic Department and will have primary responsibility for road safety campaigns and initiatives in the Bahamas. The Council will also work to establish local, regional, and international partnerships to improve cooperation, enhance networking, and exchange best practices. Madam Speaker, the week of the 6th to the 12th of March 2023 has been designated as Road Safety Week. Several activities are planned to promote road safety throughout the Bahamas. These events include Road Safety Awareness Visibility Day, the release of a video documentary on road safety, and a virtual music and road safety awareness rally on the radio stations of the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. Additional information will be shared by the Ministry of Transport and Housing shortly. During the month of March, the ministry will also launch Heads Up, Phones Down, a road safety outreach initiative for students and teens. The initiative will see the Ministry of Transport and Housing partner with schools, colleges, and youth organizations throughout the Bahamas to encourage road safety awareness. Efforts are also underway to improve and enhance the vehicle inspection and testing processes at the Road Traffic Department. It is important to note that the new processes will not frustrate or disenfranchise members of the public. Madam Speaker, we must move from a manual vehicle inspection to a digital vehicle inspection regime that not only tests braking and light systems, but also suspensions, wheel alignments, and shock systems. In short, the new vehicle inspection process will ensure that safe vehicles are on our streets. Madam Speaker, for our country's sake, we must reduce the number of traffic fatalities on our streets. One life loss is one too many. Traffic accidents are preventable, and we must encourage safe driving on a consistent and everyday basis. On behalf of the Minister of Transport and Housing, the Honorable JoBeth Colby Davis, I invite the opposition to partner with the government of the Bahamas on this necessary road safety campaign and to admonish all Bahamians to slow down, to stay alive. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order that the notice be brought up. Order notice slides on the table. Further communications? No further communications. Communication by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motion for leave of absence, leave to resign, seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. Voice reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Exuma and Dragon Island.
Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: a bill for an act to establish the Tourism Development Corporation of the Bahamas, to establish a tourism development fund, to encourage the resilient and sustainable development of tourism industry, and for matters connected therewith.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the document be brought up. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. Tourism Development Corporation of the Bahamas Bill 2023. Order that the bill be read for the first time and tabled.
A bill for an act to establish the Tourism Development Corporation of the Bahamas, to establish a tourism development fund to encourage the resilient and sustainable development of the tourism industry and for matters connected therewith.
Thank you. Further first readings? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Centerville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a copy of the following: a bill for an act to amend the Notaries Public Act.
Thank you, honourable member. Order that the document be brought up. Is there a seconder? Second. Thank you, honourable member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time and tabled. Notaries Public Amendment Bill 2023. Order that the bill be read for the first time and tabled.
A bill for an act to amend the Notaries Public Act.
Thank you. Further first readings? Thank you, honourable member. Second reading, committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg leave to move for the second reading and passing of a bill for an act for the appropriation of further diverse sums of money foreign towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing 1st July 2022 and ending the 30th of June 2023. If I could have a second.
Second.
And that's really a second. And at the end of my contribution in this regard, Madam Speaker, I'll be speaking also to the Supplementary Appropriation Capital Development Bill of 2023, which I'll move at the end of my contribution.
Thank you, honourable member.
Thank you. Thank you for recognizing me, Madam Speaker. It is a very great honor that the resourceful and resilient people of Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador have reposed their confidence in my leadership. And I am committed to proving myself worthy of their confidence today and every day. Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador are special, blessed with a breathtaking environment, a rich history, and extraordinary people. The pristine beaches, the rolling hills, and the deep turquoise waters all add up to a very beautiful place to call home. Those same attributes mean these islands have the capacity to provide great entrepreneurial opportunities in both the green and blue economies. Madam Speaker, Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador also have rich histories and a heritage greatly impacted by the Lucayan Indians, the landfall of Christopher Columbus, slavery, the occupation of the American loyalists, the commercial exploits of piracy, and the strategic roles these islands played during the Prohibition era. I look forward to sharing this extraordinary history with visitors as we expand tourism's links to the orange economy. There's no doubt the role that historical and cultural tourism can play in these islands. As you can see, I'm always ready to boldly proclaim the virtues of these islands. Madam Speaker, the iconic St. Mary's Church in Old White Cat Island holds a special meaning for me. This was the sanctuary constructed by our ancestors, the newly freed slaves who back in the 1800s wanted a place to worship. In fact, Madam Speaker, there's a historical plaque that commemorates the construction of that church and in commemoration of the emancipation of our people, the slaves. You know, the courage of my ancestors and their commitment to God are an enduring source of inspiration to me. So it is that I stand here today as a proud Bahamian, but a humble public servant. Madam Speaker, at the mid-year point of the first full-year budget crafted by my government, we continue to advance the nation's recovery from multiple crises. At the same time, as we are building an economy that will be more dynamic and more inclusive. We have, Madam Speaker, we have provided affordable housing. Pine Crest and Carmichael Renaissance are just the beginning. Launched a rent-to-own pilot to make home ownership more accessible to more Bahamians. Introduced a number of additional measures to address the very significant impact of global inflation crisis in the Bahamas, including raising the minimum wage, reducing or suspending import duties on a broad range of goods, expanding the list of items subject to price control, and now increasing enforcement of those price controls with dozens of new price control inspectors. We amended the National Health Insurance Act to provide for catastrophic health care and amended the Mental Health Act to transform and modernize the way this country deals with the issue of mental health. Upgraded and continue to upgrade a number of health clinics throughout the country. In fact, we plan to upgrade all 91 of them, and we are finalizing plans to construct 2 new hotels. Hospitals, not hotels,
We'll take
2
the
new,
hotels.
you take the
Take the hotels.
well, there are 2 new hotels on the horizon very soon, which I'll speak to at a later date. But 2 new hospitals. We have installed free Wi-Fi in parks across the country to ensure wider participation and access to information in this digital age. We've recruited hundreds of new police officers, Defense Force personnel, and immigration officers. We have upgraded Family Island infrastructure, including polyclinics, airports, seaports, new roads, seawalls, and government complexes. We recently opened a government complex in Bimini and a new passport office in Artistown, Cat Island. expanded the use of solar power generation as we pursue broader energy sector reform, opened the Andre Rogers Stadium, a world-class baseball stadium built to Major League standards, highlighting our commitment to sports in paradise and the orange economy, where sports, creative arts, and culture will become a significant pillar in the country's national economy. We made historic investments in agriculture. Stakeholders in the food production industry now say that 30 years of blowing smoke on farming is over.
Yes, sir.
And that self-sufficiency in egg production is now achievable.
Got a real minister.
Thanks to the innovative Golden Yoke program launched earlier this week by the Minister of Agriculture.
Got a real minister.
Real minister. This is part of a major emphasis on food security.
Yes.
The pandemic and the global inflation crisis have only underscored the dangers of continuing to import so much of what we eat. I can't wait to go to the market and see shelf after shelf with Bahamian grown and produced food.
Yes.
And as I mentioned at the groundbreaking of the Golden Yoke program, when I walk into the food store and see cartons of eggs with the label, "Laid in the Bahamas." So you see, I said laid in the Bahamas. So you see, Madam Speaker, we did not come here to defend the status quo. We came here to change it. These tangible advancements have been achieved even though we inherited billions in debt. Let me repeat that. These tangible advancements have been achieved even though we inherited billions in debt and $8 billion in unpaid bills. And guess what? The tangible advancements have been made in just 17 months.
Wow.
We have made major progress, Madam Speaker, in addressing this inherited fiscal crisis. And I want to begin my substantive contributions to this mid-year budget debate by describing the fiscal performance of the government during the first half of the current fiscal year. To start, I want to begin with important clarifications on the country's fiscal position. On February 23rd, 2023, a Nassau Guardian article was headlined, and I quote, "Revenue rises, but deficit up." Revenue rises, but deficit up. This statement claims an increase in the fiscal deficit for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. However, this is inaccurate. This is inaccurate.
Yes, correct.
Here are the facts, Madam Speaker.
That's important.
Government's fiscal deficit for the first half of the fiscal year decreased by $5.3 million when compared to the previous year. And that's the standard measurement. you look at what, you compare it to determine whether there's an increase, it has to be increased from something. And that something will be the 6 months that mirrors this 6 months. And you'll find, if you look at it, that, as I said, it was a decrease. It didn't increase. Right? And we say, and you'll see, just look at the numbers, it decreased by 5.3 million. You see that the deficit totaled $276 million for the first 6 months of this fiscal year. This fiscal year, compared to $281.3 million in the prior year. I'll go a little further. If you want to measure, fiscal prudence and management, for the first half of this fiscal year, there's something called the primary balance. And that speaks to if you have to borrow money to pay the interest on monies that were borrowed, when your interest is due to be paid and you don't have the money from your actual revenue to pay it, and you have to go look to borrow to pay it, that is called your primary balance. And so you look at these are some of the indicators you look at to understand the fiscal health of your country. So let me say, in fact, for the first half of this fiscal year, the primary balance reflected a surplus equating $4.9 million, a major variance from the primary deficit of the previous year, which was $41.2 million, which was a deficit of $41.2 million. So in effect, it was like a, like a 46 million turnaround. You look at the deficit and the surplus. So this primary surplus, Madam Speaker, is the first in a very long time. Just go check and analyze it. Look at the numbers, man. So when you analyze over the 10 years worth of data, look at 10 years worth of data, it is evident that the government had reoccurring primary deficits each year for the same period. Just look at look at the numbers.
Numbers don't lie.
You don't lie. Those are the things you look at. All right. So contrary to the headlines about revenue increase and deficit. What do the headlines say again? Let me read it. Revenue rises, but deficit up.
They're always looking for bad news.
Yeah, sometimes you got to look for good news,
Sometimes they create it.
Yeah. I mean, they can't find they created, yes.
Yeah. There they go.
So those are some of the numbers you look at, So, Madam Speaker, government's revenue performance during the first half of the fiscal year 2022-2023 has improved significantly due to a vibrant, rebounding economy and strengthened collection efforts. Microeconomic indicators show persistent demand in the tourism sector, with continued growth in visitor activity and occupancy rates in hotels and the home rental market. These factors and revenue policies and administration strategies have produced results with total revenue estimated at $1.3 billion for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Total revenue has surpassed the prior year by $124.6 million and stands at 44.9% of the budget forecast. Compare that to the first 6 months of the fiscal year 2018-2019, which can be considered the last normal fiscal year, when the total revenue collected during this period accounted for 38.2% of the budget forecast. So even before Dorian, before the pandemic, right, and using the 2018-29 numbers during this period, you'll see the revenue that was collected by the then administration accounted for 38.2% of the budget forecast. In this year, our revenue accounts for 44.9% of the budget forecast. This administration's policies to restore the country's fiscal health are working. And they are working alongside policies to invest in our people and in our future.
Yes.
Madam Speaker, tax revenue totaled $1.1 billion and strengthened by $130.6 million compared to the prior year of the same period. Compared to the budget forecast, this represents 44% of the collection target. Again, it's worth comparing that 44%. It's worth comparing that to the first 6 months of the fiscal year 2018 and 2019. And I repeat, the last normal fiscal year, during which the tax revenue collected accounted for 37% of the budget forecast. There can be no doubt that improved collection of tax liabilities are contributing to these positive results. Compared to total tax revenue, value-added tax comprises 54.6% of this total. For the first 6 months of the fiscal year, value-added tax totaled $598.8 million and grew by $54.2 million compared to the prior year. To date, VAT accounts for 42.4% of the budget forecast. The value-added tax collections continue to improve despite the reduction in the nominal VAT rate from 12% to 10%, which meant that VAT was reduced across a very broad range of goods and services. And, of course, the gloom and doom. One say, well, if you do that, you can lose $100 million. And then the next said, if you do that, you can lose somewhere between 200 and 400 million. Now, who said that? The member from, both members were from East Grand Bahama. Some must be something about East Grand Bahama. But both of them, the present member from East Grand Bahama and the former member from East Grand Bahama, both said the present East Grand Bahama is a bit more optimistic. He said they'll only lose $100 million. The other one is much more. But I think they were all wrong. Both were wrong. And the numbers speak to it. Despite the period-over-period improvement in VAT collection, the VAT yield has not reached its full potential. We accept that. In fact, I believe that this administration can further increase the VAT yield with more compliance efforts. Analyzing historical VAT collections in comparison to the forecast for the first 6 months of the fiscal year reveals that in 2021-2022, VAT equated 58.8% of the budget forecast. In 2020-2021, VAT equated 43% of the forecast. And in 2019-2020, equated 52.9% of the forecast. Thus, although VAT collections to date increased over the prior year, the collection rate in comparison to the budget for the first half of this fiscal year is lower than the last 3 fiscal years. The same kind of trend was also seen with the business license fee collections during the period, in which the actuals underperformed in comparison to the budget forecast. However, this administration continues to tighten the approach of tax collection via targeted compliance efforts that fall under the government's overall revenue strategy to enhance revenue collections, as stated in its Financial Strategy Report 2022. With further enhancement to tax compliance measures, we are confident that we can boost tax collections by reducing revenue leakages and loss. Madam Speaker, taxes on international trade and transactions improved by $88.5 million relative to the previous year and totaled $314.3 million. This equated 61.8% of the budget target. Most notable under this tax component was an improvement in departure tax collection by $45 million compared to the prior year, totaling $71.5 million. To date, departure tax stands at 73.7% of the forecast. Also, excise duties grew by $37.4 billion to total $119 million. At the half-year mark, this accounts for 73.7% of the budget forecast. Another highlight is property tax collection, which increased to $59.5 million, an improvement of $22.7 million when compared to the prior year. This accounts for 35.1% of the budget target. Property tax collection at the end of December 2022 represents the highest amount collected when compared to collections over the last 9 years for the same period. Based on this trend, property tax collections by the end of this fiscal year can have the highest yield seen in a long time. Madam Speaker, non-tax revenue understandably had a modest contraction during the first 6 months of the fiscal year. As I iterated in the mid-year statement, in the prior year, non-tax revenues were inflated due to dividend receipts from BDC, the first in a very long time. Nevertheless, non-tax revenue totaled $160.6 million during the first half of the fiscal year, and compared to the budget forecast, this accounts for 51.9% of the budget target. During the period, non-tax revenue improvements were seen in premiums, fees, and current claims that increased by $25.2 million. Madam Speaker, total expenditure increased by $119.3 million and totaled $1.5 billion during the first half of the fiscal year. This accounts for 45.6% of the total budget targeted. In the recurrent expenditure component, spending increased by $105.3 million to a total $1.4 billion, which accounts for 47.3% of the budget forecast. Spending on compensation of employees increased by $42.2 million to a total $399.4 million and represents 47.2% of the budget target. This was necessitated by the higher public sector wage bill, reflecting adjustments to salaries, staffing needs, and promotions. Let me repeat that, Madam Speaker. Spending on compensation of employees, as people, increased by $42.2 million to total $399.4 million, which represents 47.2% of the budget target. This was necessitated by higher public sector wage bill, reflecting adjustments to salaries, staffing needs, and promotions. It is important to note that the increase in compensation of employees reflects also the following: the increase in minimum wage from $210 per week to $260 per week for public sector workers. The industrial agreement signed by the Ministry of Education and Technical and Vocational Training and the Bahamas Union of Teachers and the other union, there's another, the teachers union, two of them, which permitted teachers to receive a retention bonus, salary increases, and increments, signed by the two unions. The industrial agreement signed by the Bahamas Nurses Union and the government, by the Public Hospital Authority, which permitted nurses to receive a retention bonus among increases among other benefits. That's where the increase comes from. We're looking after the people. People are being touched, right?
That's important.
The salary adjustment for public officers, we had to adjust that to that, meaning the police officers, defense force officers, and other, we call orderly officers. That were paid in December 2022, retroactive to July 1st, 2022. You see?
What a difference a day makes.
It makes a lot. Madam Speaker, public debt interest payments. I see this is interesting because I went to the, and I spoke to the primary, the primary surplus, or primary balance. I spoke about that earlier. Let's look at the public debt interest. Those payments increased by $41.1 million to total $280.9 million, which equated to 50.2% of the budget forecast. And by currency, the payments on foreign currency obligations total $153.6 million, while payments on domestic debt obligations total $127.3 million. Spending on the use of goods and services increased by $24.1 million to total $274.5 million. To date, this accounts for 43.2% of the budget. Madam Speaker, in line with government's key functions to society, key recurrent expenditure during the period, let me just say key recurrent expenditure, in line with the key functions owed to society by government, included spending on education, that total $153.3 million, representing an increase by $16.1 million compared to the prior year. This accounts for 47.5% of the budget target. Further investments of $15.1 million were made towards tertiary level and other levels of education, and $1 million towards subsidiary services to education. In more specifics, during the period, transfers for scholarships and grants increased by $2 million and totaled $20.1 million. And subsidies to the University of the Bahamas increased by $1.1 million and totaled $15.5 million. Spending for environmental protection increased by $13.6 million to a total of $76.5 million compared to the previous year, and accounts for 59.4% of the budget target. This increase reflects additional spending of $7.4 million towards environmental protection, $4.6 million towards waterways management, and $1.6 million towards protection of biodiversity and landscape. In the capital expenditure component, Madam Speaker, spending increased by $14 million over the prior year to total $117.7 million for the first half of the fiscal year. This represents 31.7% of the annual budget target. Key investment highlights during the period includes an increase toward capital spending on education, as I noted, by $14 million to total $36.8 million, which accounts for 89.5% of the budget. This reflects building maintenance of educational institutions and school ground improvements during the period. Yes. It is important to note, Madam Speaker, the poor physical conditions and structural issues faced by various schools, such as T.A. Thompson, whose students were consequently displaced due to structural challenges. As a result, rebuilding efforts and extensive improvements to schools were required. These efforts reflect the necessity to increase capital spending during this period. An increase in capital expenditure toward health by $9.2 million to total $13.8 million, which represents 23.7% budget. This reflects additional spending on general hospital services, inclusive of upgrades and maintenance for hospital and medical facilities. Madam Speaker, central government's fiscal performance for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, as I mentioned, show a deficit of $276 million, which accounts for 2.1% of the nominal GDP. Compared to the budget forecast, this deficit equates to 48.9% of the budget target. Compared to the prior year, as I mentioned before, the deficit to date represents a decrease of $5.3 million from the deficit of $281.3 million in the same period of the prior year. This deficit, at the time, accounted for 2.5% of nominal GDP. Madam Speaker, as a result of net borrowing activities, central government debt increased by $236.2 million to $11 million and $36, which equated to 86.9% of GDP at the end of December 2022. This is equivalent to the ratio at the end of June 2022. At the end of December 2022, domestic debt accounted for $5,863, or 53.1% of total central government debt. Foreign debt accounted for $5,173 million, or 46.9% of total central government debt. Madam Speaker, the supplementary budget for the fiscal year 2022-2023 was tabled last week as well, which entail amendments to the revenue and expenditure budget estimates laid out in the original budget. This supplementary budget aimed to reallocate funding so that projects that have already begun can be sufficiently funded, and projects with a late start can now continue with the appropriate funding. In regard to revenue, the budget estimate for total revenue was revised upwards from $2.804 billion to $2.857 billion, a $53 million increase. This mainly reflects a net increase of $45 million to the tax revenue account for higher collection of excise duty. In a non-tax component, the budget estimate was revised upward from $309.4 million to $317.4 million, an $8 million increase for premium fees and claims. This mainly accounts for the $7.9 million in refunds to the government for sustained and active support program funding facilitated by the Department of Social Services. In terms of total expenditure, the budget estimate was revised upward from $3.368 billion to $3.433 billion, a $64.4 million net increase. The current expenditure budget estimate for the fiscal year was revised upward from $2.997 billion to $3.073 billion, a $76.5 billion net increase. Key revisions included an $18.5 million increase for service expense, mainly accounting for $11 million for consultancy services and $8.7 million for operation of facility services. A $23.9 million increase for subsidies to public non-financial corporations, mostly comprised of $20 million to water and sewage corporation development projects. A $23.4 million increase for current transfers, not elsewhere classified, comprised mainly of a $9.1 million for Lucayan Renewal Holdings, a $5.8 million for the Grand Bahama Beautification Initiative, $4 million to the Airport Authority, and $3 million to the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority. In respect to the capital expenditure budget, the budget estimate for the fiscal year was revised downward from $371.1 million to $359.1 million, a $12.1 million net decrease. Capital estimates were primarily revised downward to reflect lower capital transfers and acquisition of fixed assets. The capital budget for Ministry of Works and Utilities was revised downward by $20 million. The Ministry of Finance by $18.1 million, and the Ministry of Health and Wellness by $11.1 million. However, this is offset by increased capital budgets as follows: a $38.3 million increase for the Ministry of Education and Technical and Vocational Training, mainly for the $35.6 million towards government school building maintenance. A $6.2 million toward upward revision for the Ministry of Tourism, Investment and Aviation, mostly attributed to the $6.1 million for Family Island Airport's improvement. Madam Speaker, these revisions lead to a revised fiscal deficit of $575.4 million, a modest 2% increase from the original deficit of $564 million. The deficit as a percent of GDP remains stable at 4.3%. Madam Speaker, just to address an issue in respect to the Public Finance Management Act. I'll speak to that now. At the end of my communication last week, I tabled a new public finance management bill. That bill, once tabled and passed, will repeal the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2021, the existing Public Finance Management Act 2018, replacing them with a more workable, more effective set of rules. As I explained in some detail, the compendium legislation, which comprised the Public Procurement Act, the Public Finance Management Act, Public Debt Management Act, and the Fiscal Responsibility Act, had provisions which were not compatible with the way our country actually works. In fact, they had provisions which severely hampered the legitimate operations of the government. My administration's amendments to the public finance legislation support a more efficient collection and expenditure of funds by the government. Madam Speaker, the Public Finance Management Act dictates the legal and institutional framework for supervising all phases of the budget cycle, inclusive of budget preparation, budget execution, expenditure management, internal controls, as well as monitoring and reporting arrangements. The broad objectives of public financial management are fiscal discipline, the allocation of resources to priority needs, and the efficient delivery of public services, ensuring a solid and strong public finance management system is essential to evading fiscal waste and to guaranteeing that taxpayers' money is used wisely. Yes. Madam Speaker, deficiencies within the original PFM Act undermined the efficient management of public finances. This new act will facilitate timely reporting and effective fiscal planning and will clarify the roles and responsibilities of relevant beneficiaries of government finances. My administration has been in office for about 17 months, during which time we have begun updating information systems required to comply with the public finance legislation. Strides to automate lacking government systems and processes are a priority. Those very updates will facilitate the Ministry of Finance's mandate to achieve full compliance. Madam Speaker, in amending the PFM Act, we are demonstrating our dedication to responsible fiscal practices and ensuring a legacy of financial prudence over the long term. In repealing the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018 and the former Public Finance Management Act 2021, we are eliminating the confusion that arose from overlapping processes within the legislation. Through consolidating the Act, we have streamlined the reporting processes, clearly outlined roles and responsibilities, effectively communicated sanctions and provisions for recovery of losses, and demonstrated a practical timeline. As it is important for the government to report on public spending and revenue collections, it is crucial to have functioning checks and balances. Therefore, the new PFM Act 2023 reorganizes the establishment, functions, and constitution of the Fiscal Responsibility Council. The Council, acting as an independent body corporate, will be comprised of 5 members elected by the Minister of Finance, who will be well-versed in domestic and international microeconomic and fiscal matters. Strengthened rules of appointment will allow for constructive critique of public financial planning, as well as continuity between council terms. By order of the Act, the Council shall have the responsibility to assess compliance with the general principles, fiscal responsibility principles and fiscal objectives, as well as to advise on fiscal and budgetary matters of the government. Such responsibilities are inclusive of reviewing the fiscal strategy report, the annual budget, mid-year review, pre-election economic and fiscal update, government annual accounts, and reports on deviations from the fiscal responsibility requirements. Furthermore, new legislation provides secretariat support to the Council through the Ministry of Finance. Given the importance of the Council's review of the government's financial planning, it is imperative that this legislation provides tangible support. Madam Speaker, it has been proven year over year that current legislation is not feasible, We acknowledge the need for comprehensive fiscal planning, so we have no intention of discontinuing the reporting aspects of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Instead, we are streamlining these processes to work in tandem with the budget planning and other reporting exercises. Such an adjustment is essential, given that the Fiscal Strategy Report, the government's plan for medium-term financial goals, is meant to guide budgetary planning. Going forward, under provisions of this amendment, or this new act, the government will ensure that the annual budget is consistent with the fiscal responsibility principles and the fiscal strategy report. Under the prior legislation, the Ministry of Finance was to prepare the fiscal strategy report to be tabled in November. As a result, forecasts and data within the report were based on data that occurred in July, August, September, and possibly October. Therefore, having tabled a document in November 2021 that was meant to guide fiscal planning in May 2022 was immensely impractical. Within that 7 months time frame, economic conditions in domestic and international source markets were subject to drastic shifts that needed to be reflected in the budget planning exercise. It is important to note that in this new legislation, the fiscal strategy report will align with the fiscal year so that it accompanies the annual budget. This allows for practical forecasts and underlying estimates based on the latest economic and financial indicators. Madam Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to highlight our nation's struggle with timely reporting in the past. History reveals that the fiscal strategy report has been delayed for the past 3 years. That is, by this administration and the former. In 2022, the report was delayed to capture Moody's rating adjustment to better guide interest estimates for the upcoming budget year. In 2021, the government was in a transitionary period following the snap election in September. Given the change in government, time was needed to prepare the supplementary budget and recast the 2021 fiscal strategy report to reflect the policies of the new administration. In 2020, the report was delayed due to insufficient data following a failed reopening of the Bahamian economy in July 2020, with an acute resurgence in COVID-19 cases. With a second planned reopening scheduled for November 2020, it was prudent to allow at least 1 month for observation before finalizing the 2020 financial strategy report. It is evident, Madam Speaker, that the current timeline is not pragmatic. By being realistic and intentional in our fiscal planning, the government has constructed a lens that better reflects the situation which actually exists within the Bahamas. Our budget forecasts have been labeled as unattainable. I would like to take this moment to assure the Bahamian people that our forecasts are perfectly realistic as outlined by policy measures defined in the recently published 2022 Fiscal Strategy Report. This is, I should note, a report that has been lauded by international development agencies for its all-inclusive scope and analysis. Incredible efforts have gone into researching and planning government financial policies well before the budget exercise begins. The Fiscal Strategy Report sets goals for government revenue receipts, guided by the revenue enhancement initiatives set forth in the Securing the Revenue target of 25% of GDP report. Plans for public spending are guided through research to ensure that economic growth persists over the medium term. By adopting innovative, practical approaches to revenue collection, revenue enhancement and compliance, and through targeted spending, my administration has set in motion a blueprint that will strengthen the nation's finances. To ensure maximum efficiency in fiscal practices, it is imperative to ensure financial administration is carried out in the most effective manner. Aligning the Fiscal Strategy Report to capture timely data and provide viable economic forecasts will better inform budget targets and public finances going forward, which will keep public spending within the budgetary framework. Madam Speaker, in order to reach our financial goals, we must be intentional in all of our actions. The PFM Act 2018 and subsequent amendments were incomplete in outlining agencies and enterprises required to report finances to the government. The PFM Act 2023 captures all entities. This new Public Financial Management Act has been structured to clearly outline the roles and responsibilities of all agents concerned with public finances. Responsible officers within central government, agencies, state-owned enterprises, and government business enterprises are plainly designated within this legislation, eliminating any prior confusion. It is our intent to make the Public Finance Management Act of 2023 as comprehensive as possible. As an all-encompassing piece of legislation, the new act outlines a clear and concise schedule for public financial planning and reporting to achieve overall fiscal discipline and the effective allocation of resources to priority needs. Madam Speaker, I'd like to update the House and the public on a different matter. We have previously brought to the attention of the public the startling lack of controls surrounding the previous administration's pandemic food program. I can now report
Wake up for this.
there have been further developments, and I suspect much, much more to come. After the food program was ended, while other organizations were returning unspent funds to the government, people were returning funds to the government after being nudged. An NGO, I have the name here, but I wouldn't call it. No, I ain't call it.
That's not good.
An NGO, chose to go on a spending spree. While funds are being returned to, they have the food money, I call it the food money.
Wow.
And people are trying to get it back to us. And someone asked me, I think someone was asking about why I ain't bringing the report yet. And that's the only reason why I'm talking about this. And so you'll understand why no report has yet come.
Wow.
Drifty? You want me to do your job? You want me to do your job? You want me to do your job? You want me to do what? You want me to do your job? You want me to do your job?
Don't get in that fight.
I ain't getting that fight. I ain't gonna tell you what it is. Right? Approximately just a month ago, right? The principal of this NGO returned to the government. You know how long we've been talking about this? And they're all in the air, and everyone talking about where the money is, and all we want to know is, we just want to know what happened. That's all, you know. And this guy, this person, now just a month ago, just a month ago, this person, no, this NGO, sorry. Yeah, he's a guy. Yeah, I can say guy. But that ain't him, though. That's identified as a male. To identify as a male. Yeah, male, yeah. So you know it's a male, right? Yeah, it's a male. You want me to talk about woman too? No, yes, sir. No. Huh? What you want me to do? Say leave the woman alone? Okay, I'll leave the woman alone. Let's talk with the guy. Now this guy, he returned $100,000 in cash. Wow. Right? And he still got more to bring. I don't know whether he brought anything back yet as I speak today. Right. Huh? I finished? The same guy, right? The same guy brought back 2 modified high-end trucks. What? Such as those used to fuel boats, jet skis, and other watercraft. High-end trucks. Right? And then, brought 2 boats. What? A speedboat and a barge. You know, they say, all together, that's what has been turned so far. It's 400,000, and they're looking for some more from this person. Well, the exercise is continuing. And the exercise is continuing in respect to the food program. All I can say is that everybody, I know this, I know that. It ain't me. I ain't know nothing about this. I just do this, I just do that, but I ain't know nothing about that. That's all they say. Well, somehow we'll get to the bottom of it all, so the Bahamian people could truly appreciate what may or may not have gone on. And I spoke about the lack of controls, man. Another matter is highly irregular, which, is for reasons that remain profoundly unclear, right? The previous administration, right, appointed a company. Again, the name is here. I ain't called the name. As the sole collector, I'll tell you privately if you want. I don't. As the sole collector of immigration fees. Of course, this is contrary to the practice since the department was created, whereby fees are paid directly to the government. Under this exclusive contract, every person that had to go to the various offices of this entity to pay for work permits and all other immigration fees in cash. What is deeply troubling, Madam Speaker, is the fact that this company was not licensed to collect revenue or to engage in the provision of financial services. That's how loose and slack this was. We cannot imagine why the administration chose to enter into an agreement with a company which was not licensed to trade in the terms of the contract. To make matters much, much worse, much, much worse, they collect the money and they keep it. Huh? Huh? Which year? From the time they appointed until we start looking. Huh? I ain't getting no. See, I ain't getting the reads right now. I just hear what I'm saying. Right? You want? I tell you. No, I don't. I tell you, I ain't getting you. You want me to fight? You want me? Yeah. Well, you could find out. Ask the fellow next to you. I don't get in your fight. Just ask him. Mom, when did this happen? See, sitting right next to you. Mom, when did that happen? Tap him like this. When did that happen, man? Ask him. Right? Let me tell you something.
He was there too, you know.
On the side of this contract.
He was there.
So when we stopped the arrangement, the company is estimated to have collected some $6.4 million. When the government approached them asking them to forward the monies collected, they said they were holding the government revenue in order to, and I quote, expand their business.
Wow.
I quote, they collect our money, they ain't paid over to us because they expanded their business. I don't need to remind this honorable House that this is a wholly improper use of government funds. But it doesn't end there. That's immigration, eh? This company is also collecting taxes on behalf of the government in the family islands, in a family island. And yet again, keeping the money. This is the same company that provided $12 million in loans during the pandemic as part of the government's COVID-19 loans for small businesses scheme. And the company cannot or will not provide a single record of any of the loans. Well, you know, investigations are continuing. But I can report that after discussions, the company has agreed to forward the revenue collected to the government. As of today, yeah, they say no money has been received, but they're right here, but that's not so. I'm advised that some money has been received. The most generous interpretation of the state of affairs is that good governance. See, now you want me to get in your fight. Don't let me get in your, I don't.
The chair recognizes the honorable member.
Madam Speaker, any number of persons can come in the House of Assembly and lay out a series of accusations, and they ought to be able, particularly since they're mentioning specific figures and amounts, to give the timeline on when this occurred, or we could say they're simply making up the story. Now, I've said over and over, we believe the government ought not drip feed the public. They ought to present a fulsome report. We welcome the fulsome report. The Prime Minister has not mentioned a single company's name. He's not mentioned a single period. For all we know, this could be the last 18 months. If it isn't the 18 months it's before, he ought to give the period of time that he is mentioning. Other than this, this is a broad statement of salacious details, and we're mature people. Put the details on the House of Assembly table so all of us can examine what the facts are. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member.
First of all, he used the word mature. Did he say mature? Yeah. But listen to what he said. Listen to what he just said. It could have been the last 18 months. Is that a mature statement? When I am making, what are you saying that, look, that I'm talking about the slack, loose, right? And downright inappropriate handling of the public finances. Now, let me just say this. You were not the leader at the time. You were not the leader at the time. Let me excuse you, man. You won't be excused from this, right? You won't be excused. No, you won't be excused. excused. So you were not the leader at the time. You were not the prime minister at the time. But you were there around the table. You were around the cabinet table. No, the facts will come. You're captain, right? Mr. Speaker, the most generous interpretation of the state of affairs.
The chair recognizes the honourable member from Macrh City.
Just appealing to you, in previous debates that we have had in the House, whenever so specific of accusations are made, the Speaker has been appealed to in terms of any member laying the information as verification of what they are saying. So we're simply asking for the verification of what is being said to be laid on the House, Madam Speaker, in the same consistent manner in which you've asked all members to do so. So far, we've heard information presented, but no specific information. So the member should either lay the specific information, or he should withdraw it until such time as he's prepared to do so. But even if it's an investigation, you are giving an update, and you ought to lay it on the table.
As I told the member, I'm not going to engage in anything that is going to involve the tension that exists over there. I suffice it to say, right, that I'm not going to raise a matter. Well, I will if it's under my watch, but let me just say this. We're speaking about what? Looseness, right? Lack of accountability and transparency. And I'm saying that the previous administration, I said the previous administration, so at least you have a timeline. It wasn't the last 18 months, right? So you got that timeline, right? When we came in, we stopped it. Right? We stopped it when we uncovered it.
June 2021.
Right? So it's sometime prior to at least November 2022. Go back as far as you want. So I'll give you that timeline. And then you could deal with that how you wish.
And 2022. May 2017.
Yeah, far back as May 17. That's good. Yeah, okay. Somewhere in that region. You know, the most generous interpretation of this state of affairs is that good governance and fiscal accountability was seriously lacking under the previous administration. We have been working assiduously to ensure that much higher standards and better controls are in place. That's what we are doing. Right? Madam Speaker, in conclusion, that the Bahamian people have the capacity to overcome times of crisis and tragedy should never be doubted. In our recent past alone, we have weathered the global financial meltdown of 2008, powerful hurricanes, including Macrh and Dorian, and a global pandemic that sealed us off from the world. It is our faith in God, and our no-quit spirit that make it possible for us to get up, dust ourselves off, and continue building our beautiful families, communities, and nations. We have the confidence of a people who know we can respond with resolve and ingenuity to our troubles and trials. And so, I'm wrapping up. Let me say this. Climate change is perhaps the most formidable challenge we have faced yet. Given the complexity of the problem, the imminent danger it presents, and the need to persuade the wealthiest countries and companies in the world to change their ways. Yet, you have shown that the Bahamas can lead on this issue, an issue that affects every country, everywhere, but is most immediately an existential crisis for small island nations like ours. This is a challenge that demands ambition and seriousness of purpose from us. It is a challenge that requires us to build alliances with other nations. This is not something we can solve alone. It is a challenge that requires us to call out excuses for inaction or delay, because we can't afford either. And one hopes It is a challenge that we face together as a nation, united in our determination, no matter what other differences we may have on other issues. Madam Speaker, we have to look out for our own future. That's our job, no one else's. But let me say this. I believe that our best days still lie ahead. Yeah. It is an extraordinary privilege at this juncture in our history and development, in our 50th year of national sovereignty, to lead our great nation. My government and I humbly ask for the continued partnership and support of all Bahamians as we work together in faith to lift people up and to build a stronger, safer, more prosperous nation. Madam Speaker, the 2022-2023 budget forms a firm and solid foundation for change and progress. And at the mid-year point, this ship of state is on the right course. As I did at the beginning of the fiscal year, I again commend this budget to this honorable House. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I did not want to interrupt the Prime Minister, and so intentionally waited until the end of his presentation. But the Prime Minister made it a point to speak to the deficit, and he referenced the article that revenue was up and the deficit was up, and saying that that article was wrong. The first thing I want to mention is the 269 deficit was the government's own figure. So in the first 6 months report budgetary performance, 2021, 2022, July to December, this was where the 269 figure came from. So this wasn't a figure that was pulled out of the air, but this was a figure that was presented, tabled in this place, presented by the Ministry of Finance. One only needs to look at page 5, and also look at the table of page 6, which speaks to the deficit. And the line item that has here, deficit, it has 269. But the other point, Madam Speaker, that if the Prime Minister could clarify, is in the Prime Minister's own communication that he made last week. At page 45, the Prime Minister, under the heading Borrowing and Deficit, it says, Madam Speaker, during the period, the government experienced a net deficit of $285.7 million, which represented an increase of $7.8 million compared to the previously compared period. So it appears as though, from your statement, you have indicated that there was an increase in terms of what took place compared to last year. You are now giving it different information, and I'm asking the Prime Minister if he could clarify, because this was a speech that he made just last week. So if he could give an explanation as to what the difference is, and that's how we ended up with the headline was based on what this was said.
Yeah, but
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Ramkins, Salvador.
yeah, no, but the figures, the numbers speak for themselves, and everyone will see that was a misspeak by the writers, and that's why I made it a point to correct it this way. No, what I said today is correct.
Is there a seconder? Forbes. Okay, I'm trying to get your attention.
Yeah, I read it now.
Read a second time.
Yeah. Which one? Yeah. So I could. That's it. Yeah. I mean, I can give this to you now. I'll give this to you now, so you can read it now, and then you ask for a second. No, I read it now, and then you ask for a second. Okay.
You want me to get up?
Yeah.
You all signed a contract.
Order that the notice be brought up.
And you all know they can, you all know they can supply.
That's it.
You all know they can supply. But he's my good friend.
Is there a seconder?
I move formally.
Ryan got to do it now. You better worry about Ryan.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for South and Central Andros.
Mr. Speaker, I rise and I am thankful for the opportunity to second the motion and lend my contribution to the debate laid before this honorable House on behalf of the great people of Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros. As we look back, Deputy Speaker, on the fiscal performance of the government from July to December 2022, I wish to also look back on several recent happenings. Mr. Deputy, firstly, I would like to applaud the Bahamian people for their participation in the 242 Day. It was proclaimed by the Prime Minister, the member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador, that February the 24th would be a day to celebrate our culture and heritage and patriotism. And I give congratulations to the Celebrate Bahamas Committee for a job well done. I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this day will, in the future, give rise to specific and targeted events across the islands as we continue to celebrate 242 Day. I wish to say, Mr. Speaker, a happy birthday to Mr. Leroy Hanna from Central Andros, who celebrated his 84th birthday yesterday. Mr. Deputy, this month is being observed as National Local Government Month. I want to make special recognition and congratulate 4 Androsians who were island administrators and worked in the Andros District, who will be honored this Sunday at a service at Friendship Native Baptist Church, namely Mrs. Francida Neely, Mr. Kennard Bethel, Mr. Michael Flowers, and Mr. Little Road. Mr. Deputy, I would also like to applaud my friend, Mr. J. Philippe, who coached his team, the Sunland Baptist Stingers, on their repeat win in the Hugh Campbell Basketball Classic. A single victory, Mr. Deputy, comes from hard work and dedication. A repeat victory comes from discipline and focus, such as what this New Day government has right now. And I know, Mr. Deputy, that the team and various supporters and parents all pulled together to make this thing happen. On a sadder note, Mr. Deputy, I wish to offer condolences to the family of Mrs. Cynthia King from Mangrove Key, who passed away recently. I may have more to say at another time and in another venue, but I wanted to make mention of her, knowing the impact and influence she had in the community of Little Harbor, Mangrove Key. Mr. Speaker, some may know that my father was an educator, and some may not. It should therefore come as no surprise that education has always been important to me. In representing the people of Mangrove Key, Central and South Andros, I challenged the high schools to work toward improving their overall GPA statistics. The time frame was set to report on the Christmas term that just passed compared to the summer term last year, 2022. The winning school, who had the greatest increase in GPA by only 1/10 of a point, I should add, was the Mangrove Key High School. And so they were awarded and celebrated for this feat. This achievement and the fact that the points were so close is a positive outlook on the future of our young people and their educational goals, as long as we continue to support, uplift, and recognize their efforts. In the past few weeks, I was also in Andros to present the Lundy Community Service Awards, which are given to high school students who make a great contribution to their communities, not only in academics or sports. It gives me great pride to call the name of this year's winners. In Central Andros, Tyshawn Haben, Judah Thompson, and Shaquania Scott. In South Andros, Shakee Bain, Aaliyah Ferguson, and Soraya McKinney. In Mangrove Key, Kaytrell Wallace, Raven Thompson, and Ashley Smith. Mr. Speaker, I applaud all of these students. Mr. Deputy, as we review the midterm fiscal performance of the New Day government within this budget cycle, it is important to highlight the positive economic effects of the policies put in place by this Davis Cooper administration. Throughout the period of July to December, our economy remained steady. Our #1 driver, tourism, saw stopover arrivals outpacing the numbers for the same period from the previous year. This is a great sign for our domestic economy. As know that, by and large, our stopover visitors spend more than our cruise visitors. Our strong tourist numbers in both cruise and stopover visitors meant a high impact in our domestic economy, which was felt throughout many aspects of Bahamian life. Market conditions, Mr. Deputy, have improved. We see consistent job postings for new and established organizations. We see labor on the blocks events, and we see job fairs happening almost weekly. From our international partners, we have forecasts of economic growth pegged at 1.2% for 2023 and 1.4% for 2024. However, the rate of economic growth is forecast at 4.1% in 2023 and 3% in 2024 by the IMF, which is a great indicator of the economic health of our country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy, we are in a constant state of finding equilibrium between revenue and expenditure. I believe that the Bahamian people are now accepting the reality that government revenue collection must be increased and also streamlined. Improving revenue collection improves cash flow and reduces the need for short-term borrowing. It is an important aspect of the government's fiscal oversight and every Bahamian's personal financial oversight, that where there is increased revenue, expenses can be managed and the need for borrowing becomes less and less. We made it clear, Mr. Deputy, in our 2022-2023 budget presentation that this government has been focused on reducing our debt to GDP ratio in order to improve our economic outlook. Therefore, sustained revenue collection by our government agencies have seen increases in the collection of VAT and real estate property taxes, and also business license fees. On the other hand, government spending must be wise and prudent also, Mr. Deputy. To this end, we saw government focus their increased spending on education through scholarships and grants, on subsidies, on investments in building maintenance and facility upgrades. In a nutshell, on the important things, Mr. Speaker. The government has also provided salary increases and adjustments across the public sector, some of which have been long overdue. The way forward for this New Day government is to look at other avenues of decreasing spending while improving revenue collection. Food security remains high on the government's agenda. Just 2 days ago, we saw the launch of the Golden Yoke Project, a multi-million-dollar venture aimed to expand the availability of eggs for local consumption. We have witnessed the impact that a bird flu strain had on egg production in the US, which of course meant that our egg suppliers would be challenged, and of course, the prices went up as a result of it. As the chairman of BAMSI, Terrell Young, indicated last year, we want to mitigate the scenarios where food problems in another country do not adversely affect us. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to a clear and focused structure of its financial duties and obligations to the Bahamian public. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise that we have introduced the Public Finance Management Bill, which consolidates previous acts, such as the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the Public Procurement Act, and the Public Debt Management Act. Mr. Deputy, it only makes sense that a reasonable government unifies all public financing reporting structures under one umbrella, so that there is no room for confusion on what the law sets out, and no attempts at loopholes and legal conflicts. There is also no opportunities for mudslinging and mischaracterizations when the legal framework for all public finance systems and reporting are under one bill. In our age of modern technology, it is expected and long overdue that we engage software systems that service the processes and operations of the various aspects of public finance reporting. In reference to public procurement, the government now has a new software system in place which generates the multi-level reports that the new bill requires. We are also in the process of implementing a highly touted financial information software system which will replace the software that can no longer serve the needs of the Ministry of Finance and financial reporting by this government. These two decisions represent an administration that is willing to be more accountable, more transparent, and more forthcoming. Mr. Speaker, the government has also laid the International Commercial Arbitration Bill and its 2023 amendment. Like mediation, arbitration can be a powerful tool for resolving disputes without a court's involvement. This amendment allows for the expansion of the 2009 Arbitration Act to include the resolution of trust disputes through arbitration. The number of disputes involving trusts has risen significantly in recent years. And since many international arbitrations presently take place here, it is sensible for the government to include this aspect of arbitrations. As a neutral location, we can attract more opportunities for arbitral institutions to come here to resolve their conflicts, which can now include trust disputes. International arbitration is less expensive than international litigation, but it can still draw international executives to our shores for this process. Mr. Speaker, this adds value to our credibility as a resource for international arbitration with neutral and unbiased parties. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude my contribution, I wish to express the motivation for the continued support of this New Day government by the Bahamian people. With a streamlined approach to recovering revenue, we see that the deficit is shrinking. This Davis-Cooper administration will continue to fine-tune its fiscal consolidation strategy. Mr. Speaker, the economy is well on its way in rebounding. More tourism projects are on the way. More business diversification opportunities are on the way. And more importantly, Mr. Speaker, a new airport for South Andros is on the way. It's a shining new day for the people of South Andros, as the government has just announced a pre-qualification process for a new airport in Congo Town. I am very grateful to the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, and the member for Exuma and Ragged Island in their ministerial capacities for not forgetting about the big yard. Andros is a giant, and it is awakening. Its people are ready and poised for progress. The time has long passed when the people of Andros rejoice about getting water or electricity. It has long passed when we cheer about getting a new computer in a school. Andros is dreaming bigger, and Andros is progressing. As the bills have been laid in this honorable House, I speak on behalf of the great people, resilient people, the proud people in Mangrove Key, Central, and South Andros, that we fully support this administration and these bills and amendments. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act for the appropriation of further diverse sums of money for and towards defraying the expenses of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas during the fiscal year commencing the 1st of July 2022 and ending the 30th of June 2023. As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, I just want to join South Andros in congratulating the Sunland Stingers out of Grand Bahama. Yes, they are in the constituency of Macrh City, but they have a lot of East Grand Bahama players. So the school may be in Macrh, but I claim the players. But there is a lot, Mr. Deputy, to get through, and I want to very quickly get into the meat of my presentation. I was thinking about the midterm budget and something that Winston Churchill said came to mind. Mr. Churchill said, "I no longer listen to what people say. I watch what they do." He says, behavior never lies. And you know, the more attacks and the more accusations that come, the more they seek to distract from what they are not doing.
Yes.
The midterm budget is an abysmal failure that has us moving in the absolute wrong direction. Unfortunately, we are in a worse position, even though the economy is doing better. Here is the plain and simple facts. By their reports, through the midpoint of the fiscal year, while the total revenue has increased by $121 million, when compared to the previous year, the total spending has gone up by $128 million. So, just to put it simply, yes, we are collecting more money, but we are spending far more money. So even while things are improving, the government through the mid-year has, and I will stand by what the Prime Minister said in his, and I understand that the Prime Minister has said that this, what is said in his statement is wrong, and quite frankly, that's even more concerning that a statement of this magnitude could make its way to a budget communication through all of the checks and balances of a budget communication, be presented to Parliament, presented to the world, and then the following week comes later and a complete change in the, and it's not a small change, because to say that you had a larger deficit than you had last year is a big change to now say that you have a smaller deficit than you had last year. We stand and say that whatever your position is, whether it was right last week or it was right this week, and then we also have to ask the question, could anything else be wrong in that communication?
What else is wrong?
Because the reality is, if something like that could make it into communication and you come back just a week later, then what else possibly could be wrong in the communication?
What they could be wrong.
Mr. Deputy, it is beyond reason that this government to attempt to bring massive new legislation to Parliament as part of a midterm budget debate. But you know, it's just like them to hide some of their misdeeds in the budget process. Okay. The elimination of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and the attempt to consolidate it with a revised Fiscal Financial Management Act are significant policy changes that must be subject to proper public consultation and ample time for parliamentarians and stakeholders to provide an input.
Yes.
These bills took years to develop and years of consultation with domestic and international stakeholders giving significant input. But we are coming back here with no consultation in a few days, and we believe that we are going to pass good legislation. These critical pieces of fiscal reform sought to put in place a more responsible and accountable government with legislative framework that was modern and fit for the Bahamas. The intent was that a government could only temporarily deviate from fiscal restraint due to significant economic shocks, like natural disasters and other situations, like the recent global pandemic. It requires significant political discipline It forced the government to make tough decisions and tough choices among competing priorities. I submit we don't just change the law because it is hard to comply with. It's supposed to be hard. That's why they call it fiscal discipline. Discipline is supposed to be hard. You don't just change it because it is the easy thing to do. You make yourself better so that you can meet the high standard. You don't bring the standard down to meet you. Although the PLP is busy trying to rewrite history, it is the inescapable truth that after coming to office and the passing of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the FNM, prior to Dorian and COVID, was able to move the deficit from 661 million, and then from the last PLP's administration, 661 million, to just 220 million in just 2 short years. Here are some other facts that they don't want to tell you about. This government inherited a rapidly growing economy. Fiscal cliff? What fiscal cliff? In 2021, according to the government's own Fiscal Strategy Report 2022, the economy grew by 13.7%.
Roaring back.
13.7%.
Pent-up demand. Roaring back.
In 2021.
Okay, come on.
Which was more than 3 times the growth rate that was projected. Another fact, Mr. Deputy. Your revenue grew, yes, your revenue grew, but your revenue benefited from the end of the F&M tax breaks and tax cuts from the special economic zones and small businesses. Your revenue also grew because of the high global inflation. And if you look at the central bank's recent report, inflation grew by 13.5%, an increase.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Some water there, please.
The member for East Grand Bahama might wish to take another look at the mid-year budget performance numbers, and I believe he quoted a growth rate of 13% for 2020, 2021. 2020, 2021. For 2021, he said there was a growth of 13%. It's actually a negative 13%.
Thank you, honorable member.
So the economy, according to these estimates.
Speak about the reopening of the economy.
I'm speaking about the reopening of the economy. The reopening of the economy. But I speak, Mr. Deputy.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I'm pointing out to the member from East Grand Bahama that he just put erroneous information on the record of the House. He indicated that there was a growth rate of 13%. The facts are that it was negative 13%. I asked him to correct the record of this House, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, honorable member.
Deputy, I'm prepared to withdraw it at the moment until I'm able to check my records and bring it back.
Thank you, honorable member.
Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, the point still remains that they inherited a growing economy. They also benefited, Mr. Deputy, from the taxes, from the tax increases. They also benefited from the tax increases, from the bread basket items, the tax that was placed on bread basket items, and the tax that was placed on medicine. They also benefited from the increase in, as I said, increase in inflation, because once inflation increases, all of your customs duty, all of your VAT are going to increase at the same time as well. What the PLP also does not want to tell you,
What about spending?
they also does not want to tell you that they benefited from the Bahamas having the strongest level of foreign direct investment receipts. Yes. We were #1 in small island development states.
That's racist to say that.
During what was the worst global economic downturn. The United Nations Commission on Trade and Development, you could check that one too. The United Nations Commission on Trade and Development, if it's incorrect, you could stand up and correct me, which said, the World Investment Report 2021, the Bahamas experienced a 47% increase in FDI receipts, from 611 million in 2019 to 897 million in 2020. The FNM also had record-breaking small businesses launched as well. In addition, 260 million in concessions to persons in Abaco and Grand Bahama who were still rebuilding their homes, 25.9 million in COVID public health and safety measures, 118 million in unemployment assistance that went directly into the hands of people, 32.8 million in social assistance, 44.4 million in employment support that went through tax deferral and credit initiatives, saving some approximately 15,000 private sector jobs, 53.3 million in community support through grants and loans administered by the SPDC. And I challenge them to tell us how much they have spent in small business support. In fact, in this budget, you have reduced the amount of small business support. In Grand Bahama, spending close to $50 million in rebuilding the hospital, schools, post office, police station, administration buildings, the Supreme Court, the Fishing Hole Road Bridge, and repairing close to 2,000 homes. But Mr. Deputy, these acts took us, as I said, and I'm going to go back to these pieces of legislation. It took us years, in some cases, to develop. In the case of the PFM, we had extensive internal consultation with the Treasury and with all permanent secretaries and obtained significant feedback. All of the related drafts, bills, were circulated to key civil society stakeholders, including the opposition. But now, Mr. Deputy, has there even been any consultation? Have you provided this to any of the professional bodies? Have you given it to the accountants? Have you given it to the lawyers, the Bar Association? Have you given it to the Organization for Responsible Government? Have you even given it to your own Fiscal Responsibility Council for them to look at?
Did the ministers even see it?
The arrogance of the government continues to astound and amaze that we will come and pass such significant pieces of legislation without providing any consultation, without providing any income or any input.
Shame.
But what is worse than all of this is it is a clear and deliberate aim to absolutely decimate key elements of this legislation and to move the country and government backward in terms of accountability and transparency. Let's look at a comparison of what the Act says and what is now being proposed. First of all, you are removing, by Section 11, you are completely removing Section 11 of the existing PFM. Section 11 gives the treasurer, or the name has changed to Accountant General, it gives them the power to conduct examinations. So why would you be taking away the power of the treasurer to conduct examinations? Why would you be taking away the power of the treasurer to go and inquire and seek information and demand that information comes to the treasurer. You are deleting an essential part of what the treasurer has power to do. The second thing that you are doing, Section 5, subsection 4 and 5 has been removed from the existing FSR, the Fiscal Strategy Report. What does this do? This provides an offense for public officers, and those who are in public office, a public office holder, shall not expend money, public money, create debt, enter into any commitments, or otherwise create liabilities without lawful authority. Why would you remove that? That is a restriction from public officers and public office holders that they cannot create debt, enter into any commitments, otherwise, or liabilities without lawful authority. That's gone. What is the excuse for taking that out? I have no idea, but why take it out? I've read the whole act. I'm going through it right now. I wonder if some of your ministers have read it themselves. The preparation of the Fiscal Strategy Report, the Prime Minister has made a case out that it is better for the Fiscal Strategy Report to be presented during the budget as opposed to being presented during November.
No.
I do not.
No.
But I believe that what should happen is the Fiscal Strategy Report should be before the budget.
We do not agree.
Now you may have a difficulty in meeting the November date. You may have I don't have an hour, so I got to talk fast. You may have a difficulty in meeting the November date, but the Fiscal Strategy Report should be before the budget. Why? Because the budget should be shaped by the Fiscal Strategy Report. So it should be before the budget. I got to move on.
Before the budget.
The ministry, also there is in the new, you've taken out the section that deals with the pre-election report. You've taken out the portion that provides for an independent review mechanism. Why would you take out that portion that provides for an independent review mechanism in the pre-election report? Next, you've completely changed the exceptional circumstance clause. The exception circumstance clause was a very specific clause. It says temporarily you can depart from the requirements of the fiscal objectives in the first schedule only when there is sudden and unexpected events arising from external shocks resulting in significant economic downturn, national security considerations, or national disasters that so require. You have completely changed that section. You have watered down that section. So the only thing that is required is an unforeseeable event. An unforeseeable event could be anything. But this should be a high standard to meet so that you are not changing the objectives on a willy-nilly basis. Also, this also is a significant one. Every piece of legislation that was not budgeted for, this required for the minister who presented it to cabinet to present a fiscal impact analysis. And that fiscal impact analysis was also to be brought to Parliament so that Parliament could also see what the fiscal impact analysis is going to be. You have completely taken that out of the bill. So why would you take away something that you must present to Parliament to show the fiscal analysis or the fiscal strategy for any bill? Why would you water that down? You've also, there's a complete section that spoke about breach of the act. You didn't just change this section that speaks about breaching the act. You took the whole section off and took the whole section out. And that section spoke to, if you breach the act, here are the consequences. Well, we don't want to change that. We just can take the whole thing out. So that if you breach it, oh, forget whatever happens to you. We take that whole thing out. We don't want to bother with breaching the act. So you take that off. The Fiscal Responsibility Council. This is one that really, really is very, I mean, it's amazing that you would have read this through and decided to proceed with this. The Fiscal Responsibility Council, which is supposed to be an independent council to review what this budget process and what the financial circumstances are. The first thing you do is, in the previous bill, the Fiscal Council could have hired experts without requiring any permission from the minister. What do? You put the minister must now approve. So if they're supposed to be independent and they need an expert, they must now get permission from the Minister of Finance to get an expert?
Shame.
Why would you even do that?
You want no checks and balances, no checks.
They have, again, in the existing act, there is provision in the budget for the Fiscal Responsibility Council. In fact, once you look inside the budget book and you see under the House of Assembly, there is a line item. I believe it's $150 million. What do? You take that out. So now, instead of it being in the House of Assembly, you got to go beg in Ministry of Finance for money. And they are the same ones that you must judge. So what independence, what possible independence could you have? And that was the reasoning why the funds were put in the House of Assembly. So there was at least some semblance of independence. Again, Mr. Deputy, the appointment of the Fiscal Council, you know, in the existing act, it had to be the University of the Bahamas, somebody from Macrh. There were specific institutions that persons came from. And the appointment was by the Speaker of the House. So what do? You change that. The appointment is now by the Minister of Finance. So the Minister of Finance can appoint whoever he wishes to judge himself.
All powerful, no checks and balances.
To judge himself.
No checks and balances.
I appoint the people who are supposed to be independent, and you got to come to me for an expert, and you got to come to me for money. My father.
You would have been fighting this a few years ago when you were a younger man. You would have been
Get this one.
You would have been burning the
Get this one.
of cabinet.
In the act, they have created a new clause of confidential information that wasn't there before. This new clause now says that the Minister of Finance could determine that if I send the Fiscal Council information, that's confidential, and you can't tell the public about it. Well, goodness gracious.
Wow.
How could the Minister of Finance determine that the information he sends to the Fiscal Council, that's confidential, and you cannot tell the public about it?
Freedom of information.
And they put an offense in there that if you breach confidentiality,
undemocratic.
It is an offense for you to breach the confidentiality clause.
Undemocratic.
I wonder if any of the ministers actually read this and then got feedback. Got feedback from what's going on.
We talking about all through.
I have to move on very quickly. The budget reserve appropriation. You know, the budget reserve appropriation is it's a line item in the budget. That if you do not, if there is something that is not allocated in the budget, you could get it out of this budget reserve appropriation. But I want you all to check this. What was there previously, you had to go to cabinet. And you had to get permission from cabinet to use this budget reserve account. The ministers had to go to cabinet and get cabinet permission. Well, right now, your financial secretary or whoever in your Ministry of Finance Oh, you don't need cabinet approval for that. All ministers don't need to hear that. I can determine, the Ministry of Finance can determine how we're going to use this budget appropriation account. And also, the ministry, the Auditor General, the Auditor General audits this budget reserve account. You take that out. So the Auditor General now, it was specifically meant inside this that the Auditor General would look at this this budget reserve application. And so you've taken the section out that provides, yes, that's what they do. And I wonder how it is that you all agreed to this. Again, that's what happens when you don't consult, you know. Finally, there's a whole section that speaks to the offenses. They didn't just modify the offenses. They didn't just say, well, okay, this offense don't work, that offense don't work, so we can take this out, we can modify. They take all of the offenses out. You know, in legislation, at the back, you see if you breached this act, or if you breached this, this is what happens. It creates offenses. The offenses were in the original PFM. You've taken the offenses out, which means the PFM has no teeth. Yep. It has absolutely no teeth. So why would you?
Now, therefore, no condemnation.
Why would you take out every single offense? I have to move on. Mr. Deputy, the Prime Minister did not mention the Central Bank Amendment Act. Didn't explain it, didn't speak to it, didn't say what it was about, what it was necessary for, and so on. So the only thing, here is what this is about. We were right when we said that the government breached the law and breached the Central Bank Act when they took the SDRs and borrowed monies from the central bank.
Shame.
It is against the Central Bank Act. So what does this government do? We will pass an act, and we will make that act retroactive to go ahead and clean up our breach of the law.
Wow. Yes, that's exactly what it was.
We said from December.
Retroactive.
We said from December that it was against the Central Bank Act for you to borrow monies in these kinds of circumstances. They then took it. They then borrowed it. They then got in advance.
It did.
But now they are going back and making the law retroactive, which is again in essence cleaning up their breach. But we're not going to remain silent on that. We're going to say that it was wrong. We're going to say that you ought not have breached the law, and somebody ought to be held accountable for breaching the law. Mr. Deputy, my last 2 minutes.
You get 5 extra minutes.
I've got some very serious questions that I have to ask. The vacation home rentals. You are now saying to vacation home rental owners that they must register with the DIR. Well, even if they make less than $100,000, if that is the case, we want to understand the legal ability to force someone to register if they are making less than $100,000. Yeah. Also, your remark said, if you register, you won't have to pay for this year's business license. Well, does that mean that if you don't register, you have to pay business license? And also, does that mean that you will now be charging for business license? If you can charge for business license, then say you can charge for business license. Don't do it in this roundabout, secretive way. Also, who did you consult? Did you even consult the tourism experts? Did you even consult the tourism experts on such an important issue that affects them?
Did they talk to you?
Mr. Deputy, as I close, I no longer listen to what people say.
What would they do?
I watch what they do.
Amen.
Behavior never lies.
Yes, sir.
So what do? They increase travel by $3.9 million. That's what they do. The Office of the Prime Minister's travel has been increased by over $1 million. You have decreased health capital budget for the Grand Bahama Equity. You've decreased that. Why? By $3 million. You've decreased the program to support health sector. A program to support health sector you've decreased by $3 million. Given all the stuff that we are facing in the health sector, you've decreased that. Also, you have decreased the health sector, capital support, health sector decreased by $3 million. Small business support, you've decreased by $4 million. This big talk about $50 million that you're going to spend every year. Well, then why in the world would you decrease?
Honorable member, are you requesting more time?
Mr. Deputy, please, if I could have an additional 5 minutes, I would be most grateful. I would be most grateful, Mr. Deputy.
I vote yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Deputy, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. The Bahamas Development Bank, that loans monies and supports small businesses. You've decreased the Bahamas Development Bank by $2 million. Why would you do that? The Renewable Energy Project, you decreased by $3 million. The Family Island Capital, Family Island MPs, I know you're all with me on this one. You have decreased the $12 million that you allocated. You've decreased the Family Island Capital Development by $10 million. By $10 million, you've decreased that. Acquisition of vessels for the Defense Force, you've decreased by $2.2 million. Road maintenance, I want everybody who drives a vehicle in Nassau and the Family Island to listen to this one. You've decreased road maintenance for works. You've decreased that by $3.7 million. Why in the world would you increase the travel budget by $4 million and then decrease the roads, the monies that fix the roads?
Locals can't travel.
You've decreased that by $3.7 million. Why in the world would you increase the travel budget, but you've decreased small business development by $4 million? Again, we don't listen to what you say. We watch what you do. Mr. Deputy, I also want to speak to the issue that was raised by the member for Exuma, and this is the Bahamas country. This is the Bahamas country. Yeah. This is my last point.
Okay.
And I'm responding.
Thank you, honorable member.
I'm responding to the point that was raised by the member for Exuma. According to the IMF 2021 country report, the Bahamas is experiencing a tourism rebound, and real GDP growth in 2021 was close to 14%. The GDP growth is a significant an improvement and so on. So it is a significant improvement from the decline of 16%, which was the previous year. So I stand by what the IMF says. My quote was based on what the IMF says, and I rely on what the IMF says. That GDP growth in 2021 was close to 14%, which again I present as evidence that you inherited a growing economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honorable member. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Mr. Deputy, I make reference to the official government statistics on page 1. I invite the member for East Grand Bahama to acquaint himself with these numbers. These are the official records of the government, and it talks about growth rate in current prices, a negative 13% in 2020, 2021. However, in 2021, 2022, when we were in office, the growth rate was 28.9%. That's what he should talk. I will make one further observation, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy, we have good professionals at the Ministry of Finance. We rely on them for information, not any other external sources, Mr. Deputy. We determine what the growth rate is, and we've quoted here in this book, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Macrh City.
Let him talk.
I want to make sure that the impression is not left that we on this side, I myself in particular, respect highly all of the members of the Ministry of Finance. They are a hard-working team. And and the same people who helped us and the same people who advise us are also some of the same people that advise you. However, I still stand by. What IMF has said about the growing economy and what the PLP government met. They met in place a growing economy.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Macrh City.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. This document can be tabled if they need to consult it. Mr. Deputy, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island seeks to mislead the public. The member had no issue with Ministry of Finance staff. He had issue with the same speech writers who misled the Prime Minister, causing him to inadvertently put false information on the record. That's what he was referring to. But let me read your figures. On the same subject. Mr. Deputy, the Fiscal Strategy Report 2022, which has just been released. You can look at paragraph and graph from page 14 to show 13.7% growth. That's what's listed in your report. In your report, let me read it for you. In your report, official estimates released by BNSI place real output at 9,836 million for 2021, a gain of 13.7% from 8,650.2 million in 2020. This represents a variance of 11.7 from the original forecast of 2% used in the IMF 2021 World Economic Outlook Framework, as more accurate information were provided and revisions were made to current estimates. And I could go on, Mr. Deputy. So all of the sources that they use, that we have used, is what has been put on the record. They are wrong and they are unwilling to admit it. And they are unwilling to admit it. You have the report.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Exuma and Ragged Island.
Mr. Deputy, I'm not here to go back and forth with the members from the other side. No. I'm simply here to point out that on page 1 of the official document of the Ministry of Finance, the growth rate was a negative 13.7%. I cannot validate what they're quoting from. I don't know where they get it from, but if they have some information, Mr. Deputy, they can lay it on the table, or they can make reference to page 1 of this book.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for West Grand Bahama and Bimini.
Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Mr. Deputy.
Yes.
Mr. Deputy, we now move for the lunch break. So I now move for House breaks until 3.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Lay it, man. Lay it.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House be suspended to 3 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The motion is carried. The business of the House stands suspended to 3 p.m. Sergeant.
So,